An early edition at 6 tonight. South Korea called on Pyongyang to respond promptly to its proposal to hold final talks to normalize Gaeseong. But even after Seoul warned of grave consequences, North Korea remains silent. South Korea posted a large current account surplus for the 17th straight month. The surplus in the first half of this year set a 6-month record. But China's slowing economy is clouding the outlook of the nation's all-important exports. From Tunisia to Cairo, the people came together to successfully overthrow those in power, marking a new, brighter chapter in their country's history. Unfortunately, the Arab Spring movement may have reached a full stop, as what followed are mostly instability, violence, and deaths. We have these stories and more.
It is 11 a.m. in Bern, 12 noon in Ramallah, and 6 on a Tuesday evening here in Seoul. Welcome to Early Edition at 6. I'm Moon Gon-young.
And I'm Daniel Chen. Thank you for tuning in. Our starting point for today, Pyongyang staying silent still.
South Korea is still awaiting North Korea's answer to what it calls its final offer of dialogue over the issue of normalizing the Gaeseong industrial complex.
Now Seoul has pledged to act if the North refuses to talk, and the attention now is shifting to what that might mean. Our Unification Ministry correspondent Hwang Sung-hee starts us off.
North Korea did not give an answer to South Korea's last offer for talks on reopening their jointly run Gaeseong industrial complex for a second straight day. South Korea's Unification Ministry said Tuesday that officials from the two sides exchanged their final phone call of the day via the Inter-Korean hotline at 4 p.m. without any mention of Seoul's proposal for a 7th round of working-level talks. South Korea reiterated its calls for a swift response from Pyongyang, warning of a grave measure if its proposal is rejected. While it has yet to clarify what those measures might be, many believe the South is considering a complete shutdown of the joint business park. The two Koreas have held 6 rounds of working-level talks this month on ways to reopen Gaeseong, but have been unable to narrow their differences. Seoul is demanding safeguards against future closures before reopening the complex, while Pyongyang is pushing for an immediate, unconditional resumption of operations. Operations at the factory zone have been suspended for more than 3 months since the North unilaterally withdrew all of its workers amid an escalation of inter-Korean tensions. Meanwhile, representatives from the 123 South Korean businesses with factories in the Gaeseong complex held a 2-hour-long emergency meeting on Tuesday. In a statement, the businesses called for the two Koreas to resume working-level talks as soon as possible and to reach an agreement on the normalization of the complex. They also asked the North to guarantee safeguards against future closures without any preconditions, while demanding compensation from the South Korean government if it decides to shut the complex down. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, here in Seoul, top military officials and defense experts from South Korea and the U.S. launched their semi-annual defense talks on this Tuesday. Now, during the 2-day talks, the two sides are expected to touch upon the planned transfer of wartime operational control from Washington to Seoul, which has become a hot potato amid North Korea's nuclear threats. Here's Arirang News Defense Ministry correspondent Han Da-eun with this report.
South Korea and the U.S. started up the 4th Korea-U.S. Integrated Defense Dialogue in Seoul on Tuesday. First launched in 2011, the defense talks are held every 6 months to discuss short and long-term challenges of the two nations' military alliance. The dialogue is a new upper structure that integrates existing bodies of the alliance's Security Policy Initiative, Extended Deterrence Policy Committee, and Strategic Alliance 2015 Working Group. During the 2-day talks, South Korea and the U.S., led respectively by Deputy Minister of Defense Im Kwan-bin and U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary for East Asia David Helvey, are likely to focus on the transition of wartime operational control. The OPCON transfer is planned for December 2015, but amid ever-increasing missile and nuclear threats from North Korea, South Korean Defense Minister Kim Kwan-jin asked U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel for a delay earlier this year. According to South Korean military sources, the U.S. is likely to give a response to Kim's proposal at the talks. Along with the wartime transition, officials and defense experts will also assess the current military status of North Korea, consult about military and cybersecurity cooperation, and review pending regional security issues. The outcome of the talks will be announced at the Security Consultative Meeting in Seoul in October. 한다은, Arirang News.
Shifting our focus to the Korean economy, Asia's fourth largest economy posted a current account surplus for the 17th straight month in June. But China's slowing economy is clouding the outlook of the nation's all-important exports. The country's industrial output managed to rise only slightly last month from the month before. Our Hwang Ji-hye files us this report.
Korea posted a large current account surplus for the 17th straight month in June, and the surplus in the first half of this year set a 6-month record. The Bank of Korea said Tuesday the surplus totaled $7.2 billion last month, down from a record high of $8.6 billion in May. It was not all good news, however, as there are few signs exports are turning around. Exports of products fell 3.1% in June from a year earlier, slightly less than a 3.4% drop in imports. Experts say with slowdown in China, Korea's biggest trading partner, recovery of the export-driven economy is expected to be limited. They add exporters' need for raw materials weakened, while poor domestic demand reduced imports of consumer goods. The service account, which includes tourism and shipping, also totaled to a surplus of around $1 billion in June, rising slightly from the previous month. Korea's industrial output also expanded a mere 0.4% last month from a month earlier, according to Statistics Korea. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
An anti-corruption bill that lays out how to punish government officials who take bribes was passed at the Prime Minister's cabinet meeting on Tuesday. It will head to the National Assembly for a vote next month. Our Kim Young-gil reports.
Korea's first anti-corruption bill for government officials was approved by the cabinet on Tuesday. The bill was proposed last year by the former chair of the Anti-Corruption and Civil Rights Commission, Kim Young-ran. Under the proposed act, public officials who are caught accepting bribes will face up to 3 years in prison and nearly $27,000 in fines. Even officials who take bribes not related to their duties will face fines up to 5 times the amount in kickbacks they received. The bill prohibits making illegal requests of civil servants through middlemen and also cracks down on nepotism in the hiring process of public servants. If any civil servant grants an illegal favor, they will face up to 2 years in prison and nearly $18,000 in fines. The act applies not only to public officials in the administrative and judicial branches, but also lawmakers. The proposed bill, although it aims to stamp out corruption, is not above controversy. Some critics of it argue that the regulations are too harsh, while others say the rules are too vague, raising skepticism over the bill's passage within the parliament. The government plans to submit the bill to the National Assembly early next month. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
Now, for the first time in 3 years, Israeli and Palestinian officials are sitting down for peace talks. They're being held in Washington, D.C., following intense diplomatic efforts by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry.
Well, just the fact that the two sides are sitting down at one table is progress enough. But as our Park Ji-won reports, the path to peace is rife with obstacles.
Israeli and Palestinian peace talks have resumed in Washington on Monday after years of stalemate. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, who has put peace talks between the two sides near the top of his agenda since taking office in February, says he hopes the two sides would approach the talks with open minds.
I think reasonable compromises has to be a keystone of all of this effort. I know the negotiations are going to be tough, but I also know that the consequences of not trying could be worse.
Many difficult challenges lie ahead for both sides, and they'll first have to narrow differences on what exactly the actual peace talks will entail. An Israeli official said all issues of contention will be on the table simultaneously, while a Palestinian official said they would start with border issues and security. The U.S. is trying to broker a two-state solution whereby a new Palestinian state would be created in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip alongside Israel. But the Palestinian people are less than optimistic.
It will not get any results. It will only be repeating other talks. The Palestinian side already gave up when they started the talks.
U.S. President Barack Obama has welcomed the start of peace talks between Israel and Palestine, but urged both sides to approach them in good faith. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, over in Cairo, the European Union's top diplomat has met with the interim Egyptian government and the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood to try and mediate a political reconciliation. But both sides remain defiant, with Morsi supporters staging yet another protest late into Monday evening.
And we're getting reports that the EU's foreign policy chief have also met with Egypt's ousted President Mohamed Morsi, who has been held incommunicado since his overthrow in a July 3rd military coup. Our Yurian files us this report.
Hundreds have been killed in Egypt since the overthrow of the country's first democratically elected president, Mohamed Morsi. In an effort to cool heads on both sides, the EU's foreign policy chief Catherine Ashton met with interim government officials and opposition leaders separately on Monday. She made no public comment following the meetings, but called for a transitional government that includes the Muslim Brotherhood in a statement released earlier in the day. The meetings came just 2 days after over 70 Morsi supporters were killed, and it came as no great surprise that the two sides emerged from the talks more divided than ever.
We will write a constitution that lives up to the Egyptians' expectations. We will not write another sectarian constitution. The upcoming constitution will not differentiate between a citizen and another citizen according to religion, sex, or ethnicity.
Pro-Morsi Islamist politicians, meanwhile, demanded the release of jailed Brotherhood leaders before any steps can be taken toward reconciliation.
Also, building this environment of initiatives requires a release of all political prisoners and ending the casting of accusations here and there.
Hundreds of Muslim Brotherhood members continue to protest late Monday, marching towards offices of the Interior Ministry in Cairo, demanding the military reinstate Morsi. Yunian, Arirang News.
When the Arab Spring broke out in 2011, the rest of the world had the sense they'd seen this before. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, countries from South Korea to Czechoslovakia abruptly threw out repressive regimes and embraced freedom. Now it was the turn of the people of Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, and other Middle Eastern countries to join in on the democratic path.
But it's an understatement to say that things have not gone as smoothly as advocates of democracy would have liked. Fresh turmoil is spreading throughout those very countries that were celebrating their newfound freedom just a little over a year ago.
So are we seeing the Arab Spring being killed in its cradle? Joining us live in the studio is Dr. Chang Ji-hyang, Director of the Middle East and North Africa Center at the ASEAN Institute for Policy Studies. Welcome back, Dr. Chang.
Thanks for having me again.
All right, let's talk about the murders of ordinary people in Egypt by its own military. Now, just a year since its democratic elections, we're witnessing nothing less than routine street slaughter. Now, things aren't looking so good in Tunisia either. How would you assess the status of the Arab Spring today that were, of all these countries in the Middle East?
Okay, toppling the dictators does not really guarantee a stable, effective democracy. But I need to admit that, the speed of democratization in the region is not really, fast enough. I mean, that's for sure. maybe there are two factors for that. Okay, first, domestically, the civil society in the Middle East and North Africa is quite underdeveloped. Those civil society organizations from Islamists to secular liberals are quite weak, meaning that they are quite militant and radical without much experience of political settlement and negotiations and pact making. So that's for the domestic factor. And internationally, the region has been suffering from several external interventions, mainly due to the presence of Israel and also the vast oil revenues. For instance, the US government has a high stake in the region by focusing on promoting Israel, protecting oil resources, and preventing those Islamic terrorism. And those external factors served quite well as a good excuse for their indigenous dictatorship and also radical Islamism. So the region doesn't have enough time to practice democratic habituation. So that's why the process has been quite slow.
Okay, it seems like violence seems to spread quite quickly from Tunisia, Libya, Syria, and it looks like a lot of people who were involved in the pro-democracy movements were killed. Why do you think there's been such a quick and rapid spread of such a phenomenon in the region?
Well, not only this kind of violent crisis, but also those, democratic, movement, the Arab Spring, Arab awakenings, Arab uprisings had, spillover effect and domino effect. So, like, good things has those, spreading effect, but also those bad, violent crisis has negative effect as well. Well, after achieving a greater political freedoms, those people just go out and occupy the street and just become more violent because there's no such a state crackdowns and repressions anymore. So, again, sometimes new democracies experience more persistent conflict. Democracy does not really necessarily stable, effective governance. So maybe we need some time.
Well, self-discipline is most important. People tend to go overboard once they try to go a little bit over the fence. So hopefully we will see some stability in a more positive light soon.
Right. However, Syria, now the story in Syria is a little bit different. The number of deaths there are rising, just continues to rise relentlessly. I mean, this time of the year last year, the death was 20,000, and that was bad enough. And who would have guessed that within 12 months, that number would have risen to 100,000, and of course, inevitably more to come. Is there really no solution to this crisis in Syria, the civil war?
Okay, I will say that there are probably two ways to end the Syrian civil war. Okay, first, the internal coup d'etat inside those Syrian military elite, and also external cooperation among those, Syria's friends or international community, especially Saudi, Qatar, Turkey, EU, and the United States. Okay, first, so we need to focus on those, the royal core military elite inside the Assad regime. We probably should provide more incentives, including cash incentives, to them so that they can defect. We know that there are probably only 50,000 military elite who are so loyal to the Assad regime. So we need them to defect from inside the regime. And secondly, internationally, there are again 5 different international actors who are really playing an active role supporting the opposition groups. But then, the national interests are quite conflicting, and those countries have their own national interest. So we need to agree on a short-term minimalist agreement about, say, we need to just oust Assad, not really de-Baathification, meaning that there are so many the Baath party elites who are not really voluntarily becoming the members. So the international community again need to agree that what we need is just Syria without Assad, but we need to say delay to punish the surrounding elite later.
So all in all, are we going to see an intervention by the international community sooner or later? Because when is really a good enough time? I mean, 100,000 lives, is that not enough, apparently?
Well, I will say that we need to intervene directly, militarily, right now. I mean, the sooner, the better. We already lost many, appropriate momentum. But then, again, those leading powers have their own domestic political cost, and they have their own national interest. So I can understand the reason of hesitation among, again, the regional powers and EU and the United States. But we as an international community need to really focus on the international intervention. For instance, Korea as a UN Security Council member and an emerging middle power, we need to continue to push the international norms and humanitarian protection issues, and we need to call upon the Assad to respect those humanitarian crisis issues and international norms.
Okay, a little beacon of hope shining from Israel and Palestine. They have not talked, and for the first time in 3 years, over in Washington, there will be peace talks. What do you expect from this little gathering? Do you expect something positive in the long term or in the short term?
Well, I will say that, okay, this peace talk will only save U.S. face. It will be very good achievement for the U.S. Secretary of State, John Kerry, but I don't think the genuine goals will be achieved soon because, those goals are really typical, since 1967. The issues are about the 1967 borders and Jewish settlement on the West Bank, and also Palestinian political prisoners issue. But then there are, internal divisions within the Palestinians and within the Israelis. We have Hamas, which is very radical Islamist in the Gaza Strip, and we have very conservative right wings in Israel, inside Israel. So I'm pretty sure that Abbas and Netanyahu will encounter enormous difficulty persuading and convincing their own people to accept these peace deals. So I think chances for the peace deal are quite slim.
Well, not much hope there, but we'd like to see some progress, at least in the Middle Eastern front, and a progress to the Arab Spring, which started last year. All right, Dr. Chang Ji-han, Director of the Middle East and North African Center at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies, thank you so much for speaking with us this evening. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with heroes and experts to help you understand the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best with Moon Gun-young and Daniel Che on Early Edition at 6.
Now shifting gears to the economy, Korean import prices rose by 2 points. Over in Japan, a Korean mountain climber who went missing along with part of his group on Monday in the Japanese Central Alps was rescued alive earlier today. The bodies of 4 other climbers have been recovered. According to local police in Nagano Prefecture, the 5 climbers, part of a larger Korean mountaineering group, were reported missing on Monday. The group of amateur climbers aged between 40 and 70 were traveling near Mount Hinokio at an elevation of nearly 3,000 meters.
Now it's time to get the weather updates. We turn to Hannah Kim. So Hannah, it's been pretty hot and humid, somewhere into the 30s, but this on again, off again rain, it's been pretty fickle-minded. What can we expect?
Well, Daniel, our monsoon season is lasting longer this year than usual, so we can expect rain until early August.
Well, Hannah, it feels like it's never going to end. For those of you that remember, the rain season really started back in June, and it's quite cloudy right now. So are we expecting another heavy rainstorm tonight?
Well, Kanyang, in fact, we do have a storm coming our way. We already have precipitation in the West Gyeonggi province and in the Chungcheon provinces. Now, the rain clouds should extend to all parts of the central provinces tonight, and there should be about 30 to 80 millimeters of rainfall, which will be accompanied by thunder and lightning. So we may have heavy downpours overnight, but the rain should clear up by Wednesday afternoon. If we take a closer look at tomorrow's forecast, Seoul will start off the morning at 25 and reach 30 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, cities in the south like Daegu and Busan will peak to 32 and 30 degrees respectively. Down on Jeju Island, we'll have mostly cloudy skies, and we still have heat wave advisories on the island. Daejeon will hit 31, while Mount Kumgang tops out a little lower at 26. Well, that's all I have for you today. I'm Hannah Kim, and back to you guys.
And that's all from us. Thank you for watching.
And we hope to see you right back here, same time tomorrow evening. Good night.